It started as a cruel joke. A group of bikers stopped outside a cafe, laughing as one of them sneered at an elderly woman in a wheelchair and her German shepherd. Without warning, he raised his boot and kicked the dog right in the chest. Everyone froze. But what none of them realized was that a man had been quietly watching from inside the cafe. A former Navy SEAL, someone who had seen danger before and knew exactly what was coming next. Seconds later, everything spiraled out of control, and the biker who laughed would soon be humbled, shaken, and begging for forgiveness. What happened next left the entire street silent. Stay with us, this story will shock you. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. A thin autumn rain drifted through Portland, soft and cold like someone exhaling against glass, and the street glowed under a wash of silver-gray light. Margaret Collins guided her wheelchair along the sidewalk, each turn of the wheels steady and patient. She was 82, a woman whose strength did not show in muscle but in the quiet set of her jaw. Her hair, once copper red, now curled in soft silver waves that framed a gentle face lined with the kind of wrinkles that came not from age alone, but from years of smiling at other people's stories. Her eyes were pale blue, the color of winter sky just before snow, and held a mixture of stubbornness and kindness, like someone who had lost a great deal, yet refused to surrender her warmth. She wore a wool coat buttoned to her throat and hand-knitted mittens, the yarn slightly frayed. Beside her walked Atlas. He moved with the powerful grace of a trained German shepherd, broad shoulders, alert ears, and fur in shades of deep sable and warm gold. 6 years old, disciplined, and once trained as a service dog for emergency response, Atlas now served only one person, Margaret. His eyes were amber and sharp, always cautious, always scanning. The world could crumble around them, and Atlas would still make himself a wall between danger and the old woman on 4 small wheels. A stranger might only see a dog, but to Margaret, Atlas was a promise. Even now, as rain dampened his fur, he remained focused, glancing at passing cars, checking every doorway, his muscles ready but mind-controlled. He was gentle with the weak, wary of the loud, and impossibly loyal. Margaret often joked he had more manners than most adults she met. The city pressed on around them. Bicycles whisked past, traffic hummed, and golden leaves swirled in puddles. A small cafe, Bean and Morrow, sat at the corner, windows glowing amber like a hearth fire. Margaret loved this place. It smelled of warm waffles and roasted almonds, and most importantly, it felt safe. The baristas knew her order, peppermint tea with too much honey, and always had a stainless steel water bowl ready for Atlas. She pushed inside, a bell chimed, and the warmth wrapped around her. Just as she entered, another figure stepped through the rain. Jack Rivera shook droplets from his hair and ran a hand across the back of his neck as he scanned the small cafe. Jack was 36, tall and lean, with that unmistakable bearing of someone who had spent years carrying responsibility on his shoulders. His skin was a warm tan from sun, not from tanning beds, but from real weather, oceans, sand, long nights on deck under a punishing sky. His rough jaw was shadowed by a day-old stubble, dark and uneven from where razor injuries had scarred his chin during his service. His eyes were storm gray, edges always alert, watching people without them noticing. Jack had the kind of presence that quieted a room, even when he didn't speak. Danger had once been his daily companion, and it left its signature on every line of his posture. A retired Navy SEAL, technically on leave, but emotionally somewhere between worlds, Jack moved like a man who had forgotten how to relax. Even now, without thinking, he checked exits, counted strangers, and scanned surfaces for potential threats. These habits were not intentional. They were stitched into him, the consequence of years seeing what happened when others didn't pay attention. The military took young men and gave them instincts, then never taught them how to turn those instincts off. He was home in Portland temporarily, visiting his sister after years deployed overseas. A man who spent so long surviving adrenaline suddenly found himself lacking purpose in a place where the biggest threat was an overpriced pastry. Margaret noticed him first, not because he stood out, but because Atlas suddenly shifted, ears angled toward Jack. Not in warning, but in recognition. Another creature who observed, who assessed, who understood threat and peace the same way he did. Jack paused at the counter, waiting behind a couple debating loudly about oat milk versus almond. He exhaled, a small huff that betrayed his impatience and perhaps a mild disbelief that this was what civilian arguments looked like. Then his gaze drifted, toward Margaret and Atlas. He wasn't staring, he was reading the scene. He took in the way Atlas positioned himself at the perfect angle between Margaret and the entrance. He noticed how the dog's weight was evenly distributed, not casual. He recognized the disciplined breathing, the minimal movement, the way the dog's eyes scanned reflections in the window to track the street without appearing to look. Jack recognized all those micro-signals because they lived in him too. Margaret caught his eye. "He likes people who don't pretend," she said softly. Her voice was warm, husky, threaded with humor. Jack blinked. "Excuse me?" She smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Atlas. He trusts people who are honest in their movements." Jack huffed a laugh. "And how does he know that?" "He's a dog." She shrugged. "They don't lie." Jack took a step closer. "I'm Jack," he said. "Visiting family. And this—" He nodded toward Atlas. "He's not a typical service dog." Margaret's eyes softened, the way a mother looks at a son who finally noticed the most obvious thing in the room. "He used to be trained for emergency search support," she said. "But I suppose you can tell." "Yeah," Jack said quietly. "I can tell." Margaret studied him now, the way his shoulders never fully dropped, the tension that lived just beneath his skin. She saw the same thing Atlas had sensed, a man built to protect others, now unanchored. "Did you serve?" she asked gently. Jack's jaw tensed. "SEAL," Margaret nodded slowly, as though he had just revealed why his soul felt so tired. "Welcome home," she whispered. It was not a greeting. It was permission. He swallowed hard, suddenly unsure why a stranger's kindness stung the way salt stings a wound. He opened his mouth to answer. A sharp gust of wind hit the windows. The rain outside thickened. Somewhere down the street, engine noise rumbled, loud and aggressive. Atlas's ears snapped forward, body tightening like a coiled spring. Jack felt it too. The air changed. Peace trembled. A storm was walking toward them, not out of the sky, but from the asphalt. Jack didn't know yet how everything would unravel, but his instincts sharpened, whispering the same silent warning Atlas had already sensed. Something was coming, and neither of them would remain just observers for long. The biker engines roared closer, vibrating the rain-slick pavement like distant thunder. Margaret's hands tightened instinctively around the arms of her wheelchair. Atlas stood rigid beside her, shoulder muscles flexed beneath his thick coat. Jack, still only a few feet away, felt the change in the air. The shift from ordinary city noise to something sharper, meaner. He didn't move yet. He simply watched. The group parked in front of the cafe in a sloppy diagonal line, blocking half the sidewalk. 5 men removed their helmets almost in sync, like predators shaking off water. The leader, Mason, swung off his black Harley first. Mason was in his early 40s, tall and built like a man who had spent his life lifting heavy things for the sake of proving he could. Rain clung to his leather jacket, which was covered in stitched patches of skull motifs and loud declarations about loyalty, words that sounded tough but didn't match the recklessness in his eyes. Mason's beard was thick and unkempt, peppered with premature gray, and his jawline was square but softened by beer belly weight. A faint scar cut across the bridge of his nose, the kind a man earns from either street fights or forgetting where he fell the night before. His personality radiated the same energy, someone who needed attention more than oxygen. Behind Mason came Rocco, a shorter man with a shaved head and thick neck. His arms were tattooed poorly, like decisions made after too much whiskey. He had a nervous bounce to his steps, the kind of follower who acted tough only when someone tougher stood ahead of him. Another biker, Tyler, appeared younger than the rest, mid-20s, wearing a denim vest and a guilty smile that flickered every time Mason barked a laugh. His posture betrayed him, shoulders rounded inward, fingers fidgeting with his gloves. Tyler didn't enjoy this kind of confrontation. He just didn't know how to stop it. The remaining 2 men stayed closer to the bikes, nameless shadows in wet denim and heavy boots, their expressions a mixture of boredom and mischief. Mason noticed Atlas first, standing tall beside Margaret like a statue carved from discipline. Mason grinned, not with humor, but with the kind of thrill a cruel boy gets before tearing the wings off a butterfly. "Well, look at this," he said loudly, turning to his crew. "Guard dog protecting Granny." His voice had the volume of someone used to drowning out other people's boundaries. Margaret stiffened, but she did not speak. Years of dignity had taught her that some battles are beneath reply. Atlas, however, took a single silent step forward, angling his body between her and the men. The movement was small, economical, and unmistakably intentional. Jack, standing behind the cafe's glass door, paused mid-reach toward his coffee. He watched Mason's posture, measured the distance between Atlas and the men, considered the limited space on the sidewalk. He took in variables the way a sniper reads wind. He pushed open the door and stepped out into the rain. He did not announce himself. Mason leaned forward, looking down at Atlas. "What's the matter, Mutt?" he taunted. "Think you're tough?" Rocco chuckled. "Maybe he thinks he's a cop dog or something." Tyler shifted on his feet, eyes flicking from Mason to the old woman. "Let's just get inside, man," he muttered, voice barely audible. Mason ignored him. Margaret tried to keep her tone calm. "We're not in your way," she said softly. "Please let us pass." Mason's grin widened at the tremor in her voice. Bullies tasted fear like sharks tasted blood. Jack took one step closer, not making a sound, not interrupting yet. Atlas gave a quiet rumble from deep in his chest, a warning sound, almost polite. Mason scoffed and leaned down toward Margaret's face. "Relax, Grandma, we're just messing around." Jack spoke then. "Back up." The words were low, controlled, carrying the tone of someone who knew exactly how much force lived behind them. Mason turned, brows rising as if surprised anyone would challenge him. Jack kept his stance relaxed, shoulders loose, hands down. But there was something about the way he held still, too still, that unsettled even Tyler. "Who the hell are you?" Mason demanded. Jack's voice stayed level. "Someone telling you to back up." Rocco laughed, ready for a show. Tyler took a nervous step backward, sensing danger. Then Mason made his choice. With a sudden jerk of his boot, he kicked Atlas square in the chest. The sound was sickening, a dull thud against muscle and bone. Margaret gasped, her coffee cup slipping from her lap and shattering on the wet concrete. Atlas stumbled backward half a step, claws scraping, a whine caught in his throat. But instead of snapping, instead of lunging, he steadied himself, pulling control around his body like armor. Jack moved before thinking, instinct activated like a trigger. He closed the distance, positioning himself halfway between Atlas and Mason. Atlas didn't attack. He simply refocused on Mason, gaze sharpened to a diamond point. Mason laughed, loud and sharp. "Oh, what's wrong? Your dog broken?" Jack stepped forward. "You don't want to do this." Mason took a step closer, chest puffed up, fueled by ego and the thrill of an audience. Rain dripped from his beard. "Oh, I do," he sneered. Before Jack could answer, Atlas made a movement so clean and efficient that even Jack blinked. The dog shifted again, placing himself in front of Margaret with perfect alignment, his shoulder brushing her shin lightly. Reassurance for her, readiness for the threat. The dog's breathing slowed. He didn't growl this time. He just stared, controlled, calculated. Jack lowered his voice, speaking without looking at Mason. "He's holding back." The rain intensified, running down the sidewalk like silver veins. Margaret finally found her voice. "Atlas, stay." Her tone trembled, but carried trust more than fear. The German shepherd obeyed, though his body quivered with the effort of restraint. Rocco nudged Mason. "Kick him again." Tyler blurted out, "Dude, don't. Something's off with that dog." Jack looked straight into Mason's eyes. "You think you're in control here," Mason smirked. "I am." Jack shook his head once. "No, he is." That was when Mason lunged, not at the dog, but toward Margaret's wheelchair. It was a feint, an immature scare tactic. But Atlas didn't know that. All he knew was that someone moved toward his human. Atlas exploded forward. He didn't bite flesh. He didn't go for the throat. He targeted the sleeve of Mason's jacket with precision, jaws clamping down high near the wrist. His weight shifted, pushing Mason off balance, twisting him sideways. Every motion was controlled, professional, executed like a tactical maneuver rather than an attack. Mason hit the pavement hard, palms smacking into wet concrete. Jack stepped in and gave a sharp verbal command. "Atlas, release!" Instant compliance. Atlas let go and returned to position beside Margaret, chest rising with disciplined breaths. Not aggression, duty. The entire sidewalk went silent. Mason stayed on the ground, stunned, face flushed red. Emotion mixed from shock, humiliation, and disbelief. Cameras were already raised, phones pointed. Tyler stared at the scene, pale. "He's trained," Tyler whispered. "That's not a normal dog." Mason looked up at Jack with hatred simmering in his eyes. Jack didn't gloat. He simply said, "Walk away." The rain fell harder, and the real conflict had only begun. The sirens arrived not with screaming urgency, but with a slow, rising wail that threaded through the rain-slick street like an approaching verdict. Mason lay face down on the pavement, breathing in short bursts. Humiliation, not injury, had knocked the wind from him. Atlas stood poised at Margaret's side, tail low but steady, muscles still in half-alert readiness. Jack didn't move for a long second. Years of discipline taught him that the moment after a takedown was always the most unpredictable. People rarely realized a fight was over, especially men like Mason, whose ego was a fragile thing wrapped in leather. Jack kept his voice low, just enough for Atlas to hear. "Good boy. Stay." The dog's ear flicked. Acknowledgement, obedience, trust welded into a single gesture. Two police officers stepped out of the cruiser. The first was Officer David Kramer, late 30s, tall and athletic, with the kind of rigid posture that suggested he jogged every morning, whether he wanted to or not. His short brown hair was cropped tight, and his jaw had the stiff tension of a man who still cared about rules, because rules were the only thing that kept chaos from swallowing his life years ago. A thin wedding band clung to his left hand, worn, scratched, like it had seen some battles of its own. The second was Officer Melissa Mel Hartley, early 30s, lean and sharp-featured, with chestnut hair pulled into a severe ponytail. Mel carried her authority differently. Where Kramer radiated structure, Mel radiated perception, her eyes scanning, picking apart the emotional temperature of the street faster than a thermometer. Her face was calm, unreadable. Growing up in a loud, chaotic foster system taught her that silence was sometimes the strongest weapon. She noticed everything, especially fear. The officers approached. Kramer spoke first. "What's going on here?" Phones thrust forward toward him like a dozen accusing fingers. Someone from the crowd said, "The dog didn't attack. The guy kicked the dog first." Rocco, still in shock, blurted, "He overreacted. It was a joke." Tyler stood farther back, shoulders slumped in guilt, rain dripping from his bangs. "It wasn't a joke," he muttered. He kicked the dog. Hard." Kramer looked at Jack. Jack met his gaze without blinking. The man on the ground kicked a trained service dog, twice. He attempted to lunge at the woman in the wheelchair. The dog responded with controlled force. No blood, no injury, just restraint. His voice was steady, flat as cold steel. Mel crouched next to Mason, who had finally pushed himself to his knees. She studied him the way someone studies a storm cloud, assessing how much damage it intended to bring. Mason looked up, face red, hair plastered to his forehead by rain. "That mutt attacked me," he hissed. Mel didn't answer. She simply tilted her head slightly, her version of narrowing her eyes. "Sir, you're sure you didn't provoke the animal?" Mason puffed up again, a balloon ready to pop. "I didn't touch the damn dog." 3 phones were instantly pushed toward Mel, like receipts of a lie. Jack didn't speak. Neither did Margaret. The crowd did. "He kicked the dog first. He was harassing the old woman. The dog was protecting her. Look, I've got it all on video." Mel stood, turned to Kramer, and with a quiet exhale said, "We need to see those recordings." Her voice was calm, but something about her tone suggested she felt a personal disgust toward people who hurt animals. Maybe because she knew how terror felt in small, defenseless bodies. She gathered the videos, reviewing each clip with professional precision. Every camera caught the same truth. Mason's boot slamming into Atlas's chest. Atlas holding back. Atlas only using force when Margaret was threatened. Kramer's jaw tightened. He turned to Mason. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Mason's eyes bulged. "You can't be serious." Kramer didn't raise his voice. "You're under arrest for animal cruelty and public endangerment." When the cuffs clicked, the sound cut through the rain like justice being signed. Margaret let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. Her hands trembled on her lap, the adrenaline finally catching up. Atlas leaned against her shin, not just guarding her, but grounding her. She touched his shoulder lightly, a wordless thank you. Mel walked to Margaret, voice gentle, expression softened. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" "No," Margaret whispered, though her voice quivered with leftover fear. "Just shaken." Mel nodded. "Your dog did everything right. Perfect control." Then she turned to Jack, eyes narrowing in curiosity. "And you knew how to command him." Jack didn't offer details. Old habits. But Mel caught the subtle stiffness in his shoulders, the posture of a man who had seen more violence than he cared to admit. She didn't ask further. As Mason was escorted to the cruiser, he spat bitterly over his shoulder. "This isn't over." Jack didn't flinch. Atlas didn't either. Mason was noise. Atlas was certainty. The remaining bikers stood in a cluster, confused. Rocco tried to look angry, but mostly looked lost. Tyler stared at Margaret with regret written across his pale face. "I'm sorry," he murmured, voice cracking. I never wanted it to go this far." Margaret studied him for a long moment. She saw the tremor in his hands, the shame in his eyes, a boy following storms instead of making choices. "I hope you learn," she said softly, "because strength isn't loud." Tyler nodded, throat tight, and stepped back to his bike. He left before the others. Kramer returned to Jack. "The way you moved? The commands? Military?" he asked. Jack wiped rain from his jawline. "Navy, retired," Mel added, "more like redirected." For the first time in hours, Margaret smiled, a tired, wrinkled smile, full of gratitude. Jack stood beside her like a quiet shield. Atlas sat between them, posture tall, proud, rain dripping from his ears. They looked like three people who had just won a battle none of them asked for, but all of them were built to face. The storm was ending, the lesson was not. By nightfall, Portland felt transformed. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick like polished onyx. Streetlights reflected in long, shimmering streaks, turning puddles into molten gold. Cars rolled by, unaware that only hours earlier, a stranger's cruelty had been stopped, not by violence, but by loyalty, restraint, and courage. Inside her small home on Hawthorne Street, Margaret Collins moved slowly through her kitchen. Her house was tidy, but full of life. Framed photos on the walls, mismatched coffee mugs, a crocheted blanket draped over an armchair. She once thought a quiet house was peaceful. Now she knew silence could feel like abandonment. Atlas sat beside her wheelchair, with his usual vigilance, like a soldier standing post. He had been checked by a mobile vet volunteer earlier. Nothing broken, just bruising. Still, the way Margaret watched him revealed her worry. Her hand trembled slightly as she stroked the top of his head. "You scared me today," she murmured. Atlas tilted his massive head gently against her hand, amber eyes warm with understanding. He was not just a dog. He was her second chance at connection after loss. On the small kitchen counter, Margaret's old tablet buzzed with non-stop notifications. When she tapped the screen, the video appeared, Atlas taking Mason down with precision. The comments came in waves. "That dog is trained better than half the people I work with. Protective, not aggressive, and look at that control. The elderly woman's courage." She didn't scream or panic, but the comments about Jack caught her breath. Who was the guy who stepped in? Calm, but lethal energy. Margaret smiled, thinking back to the moment Jack stepped between her and danger. He moved with the quiet decisiveness of someone who already knew what the outcome would be. She navigated her wheelchair into the living room, where Jack sat on her old plaid couch. The fabric sagged slightly under his weight. He stared at the tablet in stunned disbelief. The glow from the screen lit his angular features, the sharp cheekbones, the jaw shadowed by stubble, the faint crease between his brows that never quite relaxed. He looked younger like this, unguarded. But beneath his composed exterior, tension lived, shoulders still too stiff, fingers tapping against his thigh as though counting seconds during a mission. Margaret chuckled softly. "You're going viral, Jack." He gave a short exhale, half laugh, half disbelief. "I didn't do anything. Atlas did everything." "He didn't do everything," Margaret corrected him gently. "You walked toward danger when others froze." Jack rubbed the back of his neck, an unconscious gesture of discomfort. "Instinct." His voice was low, almost apologetic, as though instinct were an embarrassing thing to admit. Atlas approached Jack and nudged his knee, sensing something shifting beneath Jack's steady surface. Jack scratched behind Atlas's ear. "You're the real hero," he whispered. Atlas leaned his full weight against Jack, grounding him. The sound of heavy footsteps emerged from the entryway. A new voice called, "You left your jacket in my car, genius." Jack stiffened, then allowed himself a small smile. A tall woman in her late 30s stepped inside. This was Renee Rivera, Jack's older sister. She had the same angular jaw and olive-toned skin as Jack, but her eyes were softer, hazel and thoughtful. Renee worked as a trauma nurse, a profession that carved both strength and empathy into her spine. Her dark hair was tied in a messy bun that suggested she lived most of her life in motion. She wore worn scrubs under a rain jacket, and when she looked at Margaret, her tired face warmed into a gentle expression. I'm sorry to barge in. I just finished a double shift. She set Jack's jacket on the counter and crouched down to pet Atlas. You must be Atlas. You're all over the internet now. Atlas sniffed her hands, medical antiseptic, faint lavender soap, fatigue, and deemed her acceptable. Renee sat beside Jack. So, you fought bikers today? Jack corrected. Atlas handled it. Renee looked at her brother, searching his eyes. How are you handling it? Jack didn't answer right away. Inside him lived a war between relief and guilt. Relief because no one was hurt. Guilt because part of him missed the simplicity of danger. Clear objectives, measurable outcomes. Civilian life was harder. There were no rules, no mission structure, just noise and expectations. Margaret watched him with gentle patience. Jack, what are you afraid of? Jack swallowed. His voice came slow. Not having a purpose anymore. The admission shocked even him. Silence filled the living room, not awkward, but respectful, like the quiet after a truth has been spoken aloud. Before anyone could say more, a soft knock echoed from the front porch. Atlas moved first, stepping to the door with alert posture, not aggressive, just ready. Margaret unlocked the door. At the doorstep stood a petite woman in her early 20s, long auburn hair tucked into a beanie that had once been white. She wore oversized glasses foggy from the night air and held a steaming pot covered with foil. Hi, she said with nervous brightness. My name's Emily Ward. I run the cafe down the street. I brought soup. Emily was shy, but the kind of shy that came from kindness, not fear. She looked at Atlas with awe. He's incredible. Everyone's talking about him. Margaret helped her set the soup on the table. Emily hesitated. People started something online, something called Atlas Fund. They have raised enough to get you. She pressed her lips together, trying not to cry. A new electric wheelchair? Margaret froze. Her throat tightened. She had lived decades stretching every dollar, always prioritizing her late husband's medical bills, always making do, someone giving instead of taking. It overwhelmed her. Renee touched Margaret's shoulder. You deserve it. Jack watched the three women, each carrying different types of strength, and suddenly the chaos of earlier felt distant. Atlas curled against Margaret's feet, safe, content. Emily looked at Jack, cheeks reddening. Oh, and someone made a second fund, for Atlas. It's already at $5,000. Jack blinked. 5,000. In hours. Emily added softly, people want to help good things grow. Margaret reached for Jack's hand. You see, you didn't lose purpose. You just changed where it's needed. Jack lowered his head, absorbing it. Atlas reached up and nudged Jack's fingers again, gentle, certain. Jack exhaled slowly. Purpose had not left him. It had shifted forms and found a new shape in loyalty and quiet mornings instead of battlefield adrenaline. Tonight, a dog, an elderly woman, and a soldier without a compass sat together over homemade soup while the world outside learned their names. And tomorrow, everything would change again. The afternoon sun painted Portland in soft amber, the kind of light that fell gently rather than shone. Fallen leaves collected at the curb like tiny boats, and the breeze carried the faint smell of wet earth and roasted coffee. The world felt quieter now, less like a battleground, more like an exhale. 2 weeks had passed since Atlas took Mason down on the rain-slick pavement outside Bean and Morrow. The video had burned through the internet like wildfire. Jack had become known around the neighborhood as the calm guy with a storm in his eyes. And Atlas, well, Atlas had become something of a local legend. Margaret guided her upgraded electric wheelchair along the sidewalk with new ease. She still held the remote manually. She liked to feel involved, but she felt grateful every time her wrists didn't ache from pushing. Jack walked beside her carrying a folder and rolled up posters. He now taught weekly community workshops about reading dog behavior and public safety, just simple lessons meant to give people confidence and remove fear. But in truth, the project was healing him in a way he hadn't expected. His dark hair caught the sunlight in a brief copper glint, and his steady posture felt less like a soldier bracing for impact, more like a man learning how to exist without armor. Atlas trotted between them, head high, ears swiveling like radar dishes. Not tense, not hyper-alert, just aware. Confidence radiated from him, a silent reminder that loyalty could be gentle and powerful at once. They reached the park across from the cafe. A chalkboard sign leaned against a picnic table. Free workshop, how to safely approach dogs and respect their space. Instructor, Jack Rivera. A small group gathered. Teenagers lounged at the table, mostly pretending they didn't care, though their eyes stayed glued to Atlas. A young mother held her toddler, who stared open-mouthed at the big shepherd. An elderly man with suspenders, Mr. Grant, stood near the bench. He was lean and a little stooped, with skin tanned from spending years as a gardener. His voice was gentle, and his words always smelled faintly of nostalgia. He didn't speak much, but the way he looked at Atlas said everything. He admired bravery. Jack set down his folder. "Welcome," he said, tone relaxed but commanding enough to quiet the crowd. "Today we talk about respect, because dogs understand boundaries better than most people." Laughter followed, soft and easy. Atlas sat with perfect posture, waiting for a cue. Then, like a ripple moving through the air, a motorcycle engine rumbled in the distance. Not loud, not aggressive, just hesitant. Jack's back stiffened unconsciously. Margaret's hand paused over her wheelchair controls. Even Atlas, reliable like gravity, shifted his stance, head lifting, nostrils flaring to identify the scent. The bike rolled to a stop. It was Mason. He got off slowly. The man was not the same brute who had swaggered down the street 2 weeks earlier. Mason now moved with caution, like someone aware of the space they occupied. He wore a plain gray hoodie instead of leather. The scruff on his jaw remained, but the arrogance was gone. His face had changed, still strong, still sharp, but something inside it had softened. Maybe it was humility, or exhaustion. He carried no helmet in his hand, only a folded paper bag. His eyes, a stormy green, held an uncertainty that looked foreign on him. Jack stepped forward, body angled protectively. He didn't make it threatening. It was instinct, purpose. Margaret watched quietly, her expression unreadable. Atlas stepped ahead of her wheelchair, placing himself between her and Mason. Not tense, just vigilant. Atlas lowered his head slightly, assessing, not warning. Mason stopped 3 steps away, swallowing hard. His voice was lower than before, as if the volume had been stripped from him. "I just wanted to talk." Jack didn't flinch. "You already said enough the day you kicked a dog." Mason inhaled sharply. "I know, and I'm not here to make excuses." He opened the paper bag and pulled out something wrapped in waxed paper. Homemade dog treats. They weren't store-bought. They looked rough-shaped, uneven, like someone had failed their first dozen attempts before finally getting it right. Atlas sniffed the air, interest flickering. Mason held out his hand, palm up, fingers trembling. "These are for him. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to show that I'm sorry." Jack's eyes narrowed, scanning for deceit, but found none. Margaret gave a tiny nod. Atlas approached. He sniffed Mason's wrist first, the polite greeting of a professional, and then slowly pressed the top of his head into Mason's palm. The gesture was subtle but unmistakable. Permission. Mason let out a shaky breath and laughed once, weakly. "He forgives faster than most people." Margaret's voice was soft. "Dogs don't hold grudges. They protect what matters and let go of the rest." Mason looked at her with fragile eyes. "I haven't been gentle in a long time." His voice trembled. Anger was easier. He shifted his weight. "When I saw the video in holding, I saw myself for the first time. I didn't like what I saw." Jack studied him, really studied him. The way Mason's shoulders slumped instead of squared, the lack of fire in his jaw, the humility. Margaret spoke into the quiet. "The hardest battles aren't on pavement. They're inside us." Mason nodded, absorbing that truth, then turned to go. Atlas nudged his hand one more time, a small, powerful gesture. Mason paused. "If you ever need someone to help with community stuff, I'd like to volunteer." Jack didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. He simply said, "Show up on time." A real smile, fragile, unfamiliar, touched Mason's face. "I will." He left not with the roar of a motorcycle, but the quiet sputter of an engine learning. Patience. As he rode away, the group from the workshop watched silently. The young mother whispered, "That dog changed a man." And Mr. Grant, the quiet gardener, said softly, "Sometimes it takes claws to open a heart." Margaret exhaled, shoulders easing. Atlas lay against her wheelchair, content. Jack looked at the empty street Mason left behind. Some battles were finally over. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with flashing light or thunder from the heavens. They arrive quietly, wearing fur, guiding an old woman's wheelchair, or steadying the heart of a lost man. Maybe God's miracles aren't always about changing the world at once, but about changing one heart at a time, giving courage to those who feel small, purpose to those who feel forgotten, and forgiveness where anger once lived. In our ordinary days, at the cafe, on the sidewalk, in the rain, he places reminders that kindness is strength, loyalty is sacred, and redemption is always possible. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment about what you believe was the miracle moment, and subscribe to the channel so these stories can continue reaching others. May God bless you, protect you, and place a quiet miracle in your path, just when you need it most.